So after you've gone through client consultation, site analysis, the landscape drawing itself, it's time to begin evaluating and thinking about the final design. What I want to do is I want to show you a final design for a property and kind of walk through some of the notable attributes that are great about that project and how you can actually implement very similar strategies into your design. Now for this image, what you're going to see is a house with a nice manicured walkway with planting material on either side. Now if we look at the actual image, the first thing that you're going to notice is the color scheme. You'll notice that it's primarily a triadic or three-tone color scheme. You have your pop colors or your very notable highlight colors of your dark maroon reds, and those blend in very nicely as a design choice with the little pop colors of the architecture itself. You could see the trim around the windowsills as well as some of the brick patterning having that same type of maroon choice. So for this plant material choice, as well as the color of the specimen plants that you're seeing, that red as a highlighted sort of pop color, as I call it, is very well chosen. In addition to that, it's not just the plant material and the architecture that has that reddish tone. The designer was very smart to actually utilize the red as a border for the walkway itself. And you could see the two tones of brick in the walkway, where there's red on the outside and yellow on the inside. That's a very notable way of doing it, where you're uniting all elements of the landscape, the architecture, the plant material, and the paving. So you have this general red, yellow, and green tone within the landscape. And that's also very notable from a color standpoint because it's marrying warm color tones with cool color tones. And that's a nice thing to do when you're thinking about color and texture, these contrasting entities. You have the warm tones of the yellow and red, but then you have the cool tones of the greens. And you'll notice that there's a variety of shades of darker green here as well, in addition to the grass. So that blends in very nicely as a color and texture. For texture itself, you can also see the use of needle leaf as well as broadleaf plants within the composition of the choices. Now this is very similar to the warm colors versus cool colors, where you're having broadleaf textures which are flat and don't reflect as much light, as contrasted to the needle leaf textures of many of the grasses, the ornamental grasses that you see in the garden beds. And with the ornamental grasses, you're going to have a lot of light filtration, shadow play, etc. It's going to be very different than the broadleaf plants that are there. So marrying these together, broadleaf as well as needle leaf, as well as the tones of warm and cool, you're really providing a vibrancy in the landscape with very little effort. And that's going to be very notable for your client. In addition to this, you can look at the plant material choices in the design. You can see that it's very well done because of the layering effect of the actual plants. Notice that the designer didn't just choose one row of plants and a single plant in each row, kind of like soldiers marching up. They didn't do that. Instead, what the designer chose here is to actually create a sort of width or a buffer to the landscape by nesting different plants behind each other to create this form of layering. And that's really well done because it adds depth to the landscape and it also serves to kind of buffer the harshness of the architecture. So you'll notice on the right-hand side, there's an edge or corner to the house that nice, beautiful red maple, the dark brown maple, is softening. Architecture, especially Victorian architecture or colonial or Gothic architecture, can have very sharp edges. And so using these plant materials to help soften those edges can be very notable. Okay? But also you'll notice that the plant material itself as an organizational tool kind of mimics the symmetry of the house. And it leads your eye to that front step or stoop. And the paving as well provides this organizational geometry that's very notable that leads your eye directly to that door. And that's very important to do. The two trees on either side also frame that door very well. And you'll also notice the variety of heights within the landscape and the garden beds. Now, this can be done for a variety of reasons, but adding different layers of heights within a landscape does two things. First, it breaks up the visual plane and allows the viewer to specifically look where you intend them to look. And in this image, that's the actual door frame itself, but actually layering different heights of plants also increases the biodiversity of the different fauna or animal life that actually can inhabit your garden. And with healthy biodiversity in your landscape, you're going to have a healthier landscape and a well-maintained one at that. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the organizational strategy. You also will see that there's that layering effect in the architecture, and they're highlighting that as a means in the landscape as well with the garden plants. Now, it's very important when you're doing these types of designs for your clients that you take note of the geometry of the architecture, and they're doing that in this design as well. Also, a notable thing here is the relative low maintenance of the plant material that they chose. A lot of ornamental grasses and typically very low maintenance ornamental plant specimens, red maples and dogwoods. This is very well chosen, and it also shows that the designer understands perhaps the needs of their client, where they can't take care of a landscape that has a lot of different ornamental perennials that need to be pruned, etc. By choosing some very nice, well-defined, low-maintenance ornamental plants, they're probably making a conscious choice on behalf of the owner, and I think they did a really good job. So you could see from this image that there's a variety of different attributes within the final design that you can create to actually make a meaningful, notable space for your client. And it doesn't have to be anything really fancy. Just a little understanding of color and texture, plant material, and organizational strategy, as well as understanding what the architecture is saying to the landscape, will go very far in making sure that your landscape design is of a professional nature.